Are you looking for a cool gift for your grandchildren that will not get broken? Fall victim to being a fad gift? Of course you are. Be the coolest grandpa ever. Narrate a children's ebook in your own voice and send it to your grandchild. They will be able to read along on their tablet or mobile device as the story comes to life with the sound of your own voice. Recording a book on makemementos.com allows you to create a truly personalized gift. By recording a specially chosen book for your grandchild, you can create something that will last a lifetime. Anytime they want to hear your voice, all the grandchildren need to do is play back the recording. Take it from me, creating a recorded book on Make Mementos is super easy. You simply select the book you want to record, and then start recording your voice reading the book to your grandchild. Best of all, you can start out the book by recording a short 30-second video introduction. This is a fun way to say hello before you start reading your book. If you mess up recording one of the pages, don't worry about it. You can always re-record a page until you're satisfied. It only takes a few minutes to record, but you're creating a memory that will last a lifetime. Best of all, your recording can be passed down and shared with future generations. To start the process of recording your own family keepsake, go to makemementos.com/pages/thecoolgrandpa and get started today. If you missed the link, I will have it posted in the show notes and in the affiliate section of my website.
Do you also find it difficult to build up a meaningful relationship with your grandchildren at a distance? As a long-distance aunt to a 2-year-old in Australia, I wanted to create solutions for the millions of family members who cannot be physically together all the time. This is why I created Peekabond, an app that helps you to connect with young children at a distance. The app works with the following 3 steps. First, we give playful activities suggestions that are based on your child's development stage. These suggestions are science-based and gamified. Secondly, you can create a private family circle. And finally, we'll let you send videos back and forth so you don't have to be live at the same time, and save them in one spot for your grandchild to watch. We've got over 120 content suggestions. You can build a love bank for your grandchildren. And if you go to the Cool Grandpa website and look for the affiliate links, sign up for a newsletter with a lot of inspiring content, or you can try the app for free.
Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, I'm excited for this chance to have a one-on-one conversation with you. Before we get started, I do want to remind you I do have an account at Buy Me a Coffee. So if you're interested in supporting the podcast, please go to buymeacoffee/coolgrandpa and you can make a donation there. I've also got a link in the show notes. So if you're out running around, please go to the show notes on the website and you can find that link to Buy Me a Coffee and you can make a small donation, which goes towards supporting this podcast. I also would like to just remind you, if you haven't had a chance to like and subscribe to the podcast, please do so. That really helps me out with building the numbers up, as well as being able to share this with a friend. I think it's really important that we keep growing this message that grandpas are important, that you matter in the lives of the grandchildren and the family, and that we've all got something special and something unique to share with our families and our communities. The last thing before we dive in, I want to let you know the book is going to be finished publishing physically in this week. So this is recording this on December 12th. So this week I'm expecting to get an email saying, hey, the books have been published. They're being packed and ready to ship. And then hopefully I have those books probably first part, maybe middle of January. So I will be sure to let you know when those books are ready to go. Christmas time and the end of the year and winter time is a natural place where most oftentimes we tend to stay more inside. Wasn't more than 100 200 years ago that for the most part, you just hunkered down, hoped you had enough food in the pantry to last you out through the winter. You might have to go shoot a few deer, and you just really kind of hunkered down, stayed by the fire, didn't leave too far. And it was a great time when people were coming together to tell stories. You'd meet up down at the general store. You would have the family in by the fireplace. If it gets dark around 4:30 or so, you've got a fire going, you're making dinner, probably a stew or a soup or some kind of a roast. And at that point, everybody's going around and telling stories for entertainment. And we've kind of gotten away from that as a society, but storytelling is still really, really a great way to connect with your grandchildren and your children. So I wanted to provide you a few tips with how you can make your stories really impactful. So our first tip is to choose stories you like. No matter if you're telling the stories to children to illustrate a point, or you're just trying to do something for entertainment, remember back in your past and find those stories that you enjoyed. Because if you enjoyed telling them, that energy is going to come through in your story. Practice your story. If you're out working on the car, you're out cutting the grass, you're out shoveling snow, whatever it is you're doing, run that story through your mind a few times. Don't just tell the story for the first time to the grandkids. The little ones will definitely give you a break, and they probably won't even remember most of it. But if you have some slightly older grandkids, they're going to be critiquing your storytelling. So do yourself a favor. If you're just going to tell the story of the Little Mermaid, or you're telling the story of Homer, whatever you're trying to do, practice that story, even if it's just in your own head, so that you've got a good cadence down. You know what you want to be telling the grandkids and the kids when you're sitting down and sharing stories. This is point number 3. Take out the slow parts that really drag the action. Little kids don't need to know all the detail. We're not necessarily trying to do an Edgar Allan Poe type story where we're trying to describe every single little thing in the room and talk about how the nails were slightly rusted in the floorboards and all of that kind of stuff. That's great if you're telling ghost stories and you're really setting up the atmosphere. But in general, you want to take out the parts of the story that slow the action down. Be sure you speak clearly. And this is kind of a no duh, but for point number 4 here, make sure you're facing your audience. Make sure that you've got a smile on your face, because that will also make sure that the audience knows that you're enjoying what you're telling. And then for number 5, I think probably keep an appropriate pace. Don't rush through it. Slow it down when you're building up to an action sequence, and then kind of move the story along. So you can go slower, you can go faster, but keep the pace appropriate. And make sure that you're using gestures. It's a little bit like being on a stage. Make sure that when you're at the dinner table, or you're sitting in the living room, or whatever you're doing, throw some gestures in there. Especially little kids are going to really appreciate it. Use big eyes, use your hands and your fingers to exaggerate eyelashes and people that might be scared, so that you can really exaggerate how open those eyes are. And be sure to just use what's natural, but remember, you're not only telling a story, but you are really into a performance. So remember that. As a grandpa, you are performing for those grandkids. And then the last point, I would say avoid giving the moral of the story. If you're giving something, if you're talking through like an Aesop's fables, if you're doing something along those lines where you are trying to create a point to the story, let the audience tell you. Ask the kids, what did you think the purpose of the story was? What do you think, is the lesson that we should all learn from this? And then also, Don't worry, not every story has to have a moral, right, to it. Doesn't have to have a lesson. They can just be fun. Remember, ghost stories and supernatural stories and some of that, sometimes those things are just there to add a little bit of creep factor or a little bit of spookiness to the evening, especially if you got a fire in a fireplace that's going and you dim the lights down. If you're telling the story and you're into it and it's appropriate, we don't want to be scaring 6-year-olds with decapitations and all sorts of craziness, but make sure that it's appropriate. But not everything has to have a real lesson to it. Sometimes they're just entertaining. And so just remember that. So quickly, we'll go back through it. So point number 1, pick out stories you like. Point number 2, practice your story. Even if it's not out loud, practice it in your head. Point number 3, take out the slow parts that drag the action of the story. Number 4, make sure you keep an appropriate pace. And number 5, make sure you use natural gestures. And number 6, you don't have to have a moral for every story. And you don't have to wrap up with the moral of the story is. That can be a nice little place to have a conversation if you're trying to get a point across. If you're not, perfect. Wrap it up. Let everybody enjoy the fun. Let everybody get a little creeped out. Pass the torch, so to speak, on to somebody else and let them tell a story. Storytelling's a great way to get the family together and connected. That's my tips for telling stories, and I hope you do tell stories this Christmas. To wrap up this conversation, I do want to share with you a very fun poem that you could turn this on and let the kids experience it in the car. This poem is called The Cremation of Sam McGee. Now, a little bit of background. When I was at scout camp, one of my mentors and one of the people I became really good friends with, Andy Erickson, used to recite this by memory at the closing of our campfires as entertainment for the scouts. And he would be up there in front of 300, 400, if we were having a heavy week, of scouts and leaders to recite this poem. I don't have this poem memorized, but it's really fun. And so I'm going to read it and I'm going to share this with you. And like I said, if you like it, feel free to look it up and be sure to share it with your grandkids. The Cremation of Sam McGee is by Robert W. Service, and the poem starts out as, "There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge, I cremated Sam McGee. Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. Though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On Christmas Day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold. Through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then the lashes they'd freeze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and, "Cap," says he, "I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request." Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of moan, "It's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead. It's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains. A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. And we started on at the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promise true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains. Now a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail it has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were numb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night, by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows. Oh God, how I loathed that thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grown, and on I went, though the dogs were spent, and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad, and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in. And I'd often sing to that hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake LaBarge, a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then, here, said I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see. And I borrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out, and they danced about, ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide, and there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plumtree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge I cremated old Sam McGee. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you take this opportunity towards the end of the year to find some stories, whether you create them yourselves or you borrow them from other storytellers, or you find some poems and some short stories that you craft and kind of make into your own for your own family, that you take this opportunity to sit down and connect with them. Sit by the fire, sit down at the kitchen table, talk about it on a camping trip, and just share those stories. And then invite those kids to share stories too. And again, they don't have to make sense, and they're learning to tell a story. They're learning about, tension and action and setting a scene. All those things that we all took for granted growing up. They've got to practice it. And their abilities and chances to practice it, I think, are dwindling somewhat. So be that cool grandpa. Be that cool grandma. And share your story. Share what's special for you this Christmas season and this end of the year. And in return, invite those kids to share back with you their stories. And again, they don't all have to have a moral, and they don't all have to make sense. They can just be fun, and they can be creepy, like the cremation of Sam McGee. So until I talk to you next time, I hope you remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.